Hello and welcome to our discussion on Chapter 10, Learning and Development. Let's dive right in. The author believes, and I agree, that humans are designed to learn. People who don't learn rarely survive or prosper. Most people thrive when exposed to some positive learning experiences. Of course, there are people that have been damaged or have had negative learning experiences in the past, which makes it difficult for them to learn. Or it can make it difficult for them to learn in the future. But learning at work and learning for work involves its own particular difficulties and challenges. And of course, people are employed not only for what they already know and can do, but also for what they may substantially learn to do. And that's part of the organization's developing and tapping the talent of its employees to help them grow the business, grow the company. So historically, learning was training. The author talks about Egyptian pyramids and the British canals. Employees would acquire the knowledge and skills that they needed to carry out all the tasks for their jobs by doing, from the experience of working and watching what other people do. But as things developed and as countries developed, of course, things became more complex and challenging. They'd have to learn by being trained by others. Over time, learning became increasingly structured, planned, and formalized to a point where we are today, where I think we have thousands of colleges and universities across the United States and throughout the world. And I think, in a sense, sometimes have too many educational institutions. And now training itself has become a profession. I have a good friend who is a full-time trainer. That is his position. He trains a lot of salespeople and professionals for a very large corporation. That's all he does. It's a great job. It's a really fun job. All he does 24 hours a day is training and professional coaching for employees within the organization that he works for. So learning and training as a profession have all become recent things that have developed over the last 10, 20 years. Okay, let's move on. Why train employees? How does training and developing fit into HR and the strategic organizational agenda? Of course, developing human resources is one of the fundamental objectives of people management. It's through employee growth and development that organizations increase their asset value and acquire new capabilities. Training can also be seen in the interest of employees. Of course, it helps employees progress and develop their professional development, help their skills be more marketable to other organizations. Training can facilitate organizational change, flexibility, attitudinal change, and statutory compliance. So training is important for a number of reasons. Moving on, though, training can be ineffective as well as effective. Can also be very expensive. So some organizations wonder, why bother of all this expense? Why do we have to train our employees? Why can't we just recruit someone that's already ready for the position? And it's often not possible to recruit the ideal person with the exact skills needed for the job. Of course, you can find someone that's a close fit that has a strong foundation for the position that you're trying to recruit. But even good candidates still need to learn the unique systems, processes, procedures within the organization. In my profession as a lawyer, that happens all the time, where lawyers know the law very well and they trade organizations. They still need to learn the software. They still need to learn the procedures that the certain law firm follows. There's always some learning that needs to be acquired when you change organizations. There's also the need to learn how the new skills necessary for adapting to changing products, technologies, and markets. And that's a constant thing that employees and professionals must be trained on. Training, therefore, is an essential part of surviving change and maintaining the currency of what people know and what they can do. The book goes in and talks about the 6 E's of training, where you have to engage, educate, enhance, empower, energize, and enlighten employees. And those are all very important for those that are professional trainers, to make sure that you use the 6 E's. My friend, again, that I said, that's an acquaintance who is a professional trainer, he always is talking about the 6 E's of training with me. So it is a good foundation for training. So criticisms of training. Of course, there's always a question of how effective training really is. There's a sense that training has failed to deliver what it's promised. You spend all this money to put together this training program, and the results of it aren't as what was promised. There's 2 reasons for this. Some people say it's because training's become routine. Trainers themselves often lack sufficient understanding of what they're training on, which makes it hard for them to train the individuals for what they're supposed to be trained on. There's the added problem of line managers failing to understand their responsibilities regarding training. Some senior managers fail to understand the importance of integrating training with corporate strategy. A lot of large organizations, though, do find it very integral, and they do spend a lot of time on making sure that training helps support the organization, its goals, its values, and making sure employees have the right training so that they can succeed in their job. So main problems that need to be overcome, though, in terms of criticism of training: lack of focus, lack of support for management. It's not conducted and managed systematically. It's not linked to other organizational initiatives, so it's kind of a one-off thing. It's not integrated. It can usually unrealistically to try to achieve attitudinal change, try to change the attitude of your employees, which is true. That's one of the purposes of training, but shouldn't be your primary focus. That's really hard to institute attitudinal change among employees. So those are the main criticisms of training and what the main problems are. So on a more optimistic note, let's talk about some of the things that the author focused on. There has been some improvement in understanding what training can and cannot achieve and more effective use of training interventions. The importance of the following have emerged: employees who want to participate in their own learning, close working relationships between trainers and line managers, accurate diagnosis of training and development, opportunities for reinforcement of learning through practice, designing bespoke training solutions, connection between the delivery of training, its evaluation, and the planning and design of future training interventions, and a strong relationship between required learning outcomes and the learning methods of employed. So those are some of the optimistic, the important things that have emerged from training that the author highlights. And then there's different perceptions on the value of training. Some look at training as a cost. It can be perceived as an overhead. If that's the case, it's likely limited in scope and intensity. It's more of a cost to be controlled rather than an investment. I think that's the old school way of valuing training. Really, training should be viewed as an investment. It's a key instrument in developing the capacity and capability of the employees within your organization. Some have even attempted to calculate what return on investment training will bring. Successful firms, though, invest heavily on training, do so almost as a, quote, matter of faith and because of their belief in the connection between people and profits. And it really is hard to measure the one-to-one ratio that the return that you get from doing employee training. It has short-term and long-term effects in terms of productivity, loyalty, and a bunch of other things for your employees. So I strongly encourage it, but of course it's always hard to convince managers, especially high-level managers, to invest in training if there's no immediate return on profit of the training. So now let's talk about different types of training. There's, of course, induction training that you give to employees right when they start, job-specific or operational procedures, technology training for new technologies, mandatory training, health and safety or equal opportunities, improvement training, attitudinal training. These are different types of training that an organization can employ. And then there, of course, has been a development of evaluating training. It's a major challenge. It's often difficult and costly to determine whether you're to evaluate training, to determine whether it's effective or not. When evaluating training, you have to basically look at two things. Have we met our objectives? Has it been worth it? The resources that we expended, do they justify the outcome? That's the bottom line in terms of evaluating the training. The author talks about the Kirkpatrick model, which I've heard before. It's a great model. It's the most frequently cited evaluation model. You look at their reactions, what the trainees thought about the training. You look at what they learned, the increased knowledge and skills, their behaviors, if there's a change in behavior, improved performance, and the results, the impact on the organization of the training. Those are the four things you look at to determine whether training was effective or not. Okay, let's talk about e-learning. There's been an emergence of e-learning within organizations. There's, of course, the concern that there's a danger of becoming seduced by the functionality of the technology rather than concentrating on its use. So e-learning has been used for web-based training, interactive online training, informal e-learning, standalone e-learning materials. Of course, E-learning is sort of a fad. Some organizations do it but don't realize why they're doing it and measure whether it's even effective. I know a lot of organizations that make new hire employees spend hours upon hours upon hours going through online web-based modules when they first are introduced to an organization. And let me tell you, to make somebody sit through 10 hours of online modules when they first are hired is not an effective way of training. It's painful. They won't remember a single thing from it. It's not worth doing if you want to use that as the sole basis of indoctrinating new employees about your organization and what's expected of them. It's much better to try to use it and integrate it into their everyday work environment, so you could have them do one module a week or one module a month and make that part of their job where it's not so intensive. If you just dump it on them and make them sit in front of a computer screen for several hours, I don't think that's very effective. Understanding and managing the learning process. Sorry about the typo there in the slide, but learning process, of course, has certain characteristics. You can't see it happening. It's essentially a cognitive process. You can only see that learning has taken place through the changes in the way people think, behave, and work. No one can learn for you. We may choose not to engage in certain kinds of learning because of being apprehensive about what we might learn about ourselves or about others, or because we cannot see its relevance. Okay, and then two more things. We're going to talk about the Kolb learning cycle. It's best known representation of how learning is created. Our learning experiences are not discrete, but form part of the constant evolving view that we develop of the world around us. The importance of learning from the consequences of our own and others' actions. This enables us to understand, interact with, and manipulate our environment to our advantage. And I agree that this makes sense. This is a good description of the learning cycle. There's 4 steps of the learning process: concrete experience, reflective observation, conceptualization, and experimentation on what we learned. So that's a good thing to understand. Of course, if you're involved in employee training, and especially if you do a lot of employee training, there's some great courses that you can take that will help you fine-tune those skills to help you become great trainers, because we all have all been through training, and there are some horrible trainers and there's great trainers, and there's some skills that you can learn to help you sharpen those skills. Lastly, the energy triangle. This is another thing that some professional trainers I know use all the time. There's in terms of learning, you need to involve or make individuals use their different types of energy for that to be able to be a productive training that actually sticks, that helps people change and learn. There needs to be a cognitive piece where we tap into their powers to solve problems, discover things, create solutions. There needs to be a physical component where there's movement and activity. That's why sitting in a lecture hall during class makes students tired, fall asleep. And of course, there's the affective, emotional side of things. We need to harness the power of emotions and feelings. And if you can tap into all 3 of those, that's when you can really find the most learning among students or employees. Okay, that's it for Chapter 10.